to episode 526 of the Unpopular Podcast. This is your man, the myth, the legend, Channel Hunter. Here at the Unpopular Podcast, not only ask you to agree with me, I'm asking you to hear me out. I have been very vocal in saying that I believe that probably the AFC North is the best division in football. Obviously, there's some pushback. There's talent is a lot more spread out. But when you talk about, especially Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, Joe Burrow and the Bengals, talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Aaron Rodgers and Myles Garrett and the Browns, I think you can make a legitimate argument that the AFC North is the best division in football. If you wanted to make an argument about another division, I think you can easily say the NFC North could be in the running for the best division in football. And one of the reasons why I believe you could say the NFC North is one of the best divisions in football because you're dealing with potential plus just great teams. As we continue our preseason divisional breakdown, we have gotten to the NFC North. And I want to start this by talking about the first 2 years of a career. I feel like your first 2 years of your career is the most important years of your entire career, I guess you can say. The habits that you create, the way that you're coached, the environment, all is important, especially talking about your first 2 years. I want to first start by talking about the Chicago Bears and more specifically Caleb Williams. Because there's been a lot of talk around Caleb Williams, not just last year, but this offseason and going into this season. And rightfully so. Caleb Williams was the number 1 overall pick. He was touted as a generational talent. Rightfully so. What he did at Oklahoma, what he did at USC was incredible. Won a Heisman and all that. But we didn't get the season that we thought we were going to get from Caleb Williams last year. In fact, he struggled mightily last year. Now, you can say that most of that is probably due to the environment, and I do agree. But it goes back to your first 2 years, in my opinion, are the most important years of your career. The Bears organization has not always been or had the reputation of being a good organization. I'm just be real. Not saying they're a bad organization, but they haven't had the reputation of being an organization that as a quarterback you feel safe, you feel comfortable being in that environment. Seeing as though they do not have a 1,000 or 4,000 yard passer in the history of their team. And that was the fear. And actually, the fear that we had about Caleb Williams going to Chicago was in full bloom last year. Poor decision-making from the coaching staff, bad offensive line. It was just a cluster of mess. And because of that, I feel like this year is the most important year in Caleb Williams' career. You already got the first one out the way, and I think you can say it was a success because he survive the first year of the NFL. But you can also say that there was everything that could go wrong for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears did in year one. Bad coaching staff around him. Caleb Williams he didn't really learn to adapt too well. Just didn't make the playoff. Everything that could go wrong for the Chicago Bears did. Which is why, like I said, I feel like this is the most important year for Caleb Williams' career moving forward. Let me shoot the Chicago Bears some bail real quick, just really quick. A lot of the issues that we saw, and understandably so, but a lot of the issues that we saw Caleb Williams have in college, he transferred over to the NFL. Holding the ball too long, trying to make a play out of no play, and putting the team in a bad position. At times, throwing hospital balls just to try to make a play. Trying to be the best player on the field, and when you just give up on the play. A lot of the decision-making that plagued him in college was prevalent in the NFL in year one. And that kind of is why I say the first 2 years are so important, because the coaching staff, your team is supposed to coach you out of that. Not saying mute you, not saying take away what makes you great, but they're supposed to help you see the game in a different way. And I don't think the Chicago Bears did that at all last year. Now, there were flashes. The Chicago Bears, when you have a roster as good as they had, especially on the defensive side of the ball and offense, they had flashes. Caleb Williams had flashes where he looked like all of the number one overall pick that he deserved to be. But flashes don't get you notoriety as much as you think, especially when there was a lot riding on the Chicago Bears. But this is a new year. You have a new coach in Ben Johnson. You still have some incredible weapons. Look, roster-wise, and I feel like I've said this a lot throughout when I talk about certain teams and the divisional breakdowns. When you look at the Chicago Bears, they have one of the best teams in the division, let alone one of the best teams in football, especially offensively. You're talking about DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, Colson Loveland that they got from Michigan, DeAndre Swift. They have pieces, and that's just on the offensive side of the ball. And I understand completely what they did. They wanted to leave no doubt. This entire offseason, the main thing that they focused on was offensive weapons for Caleb Williams and the offensive line for Caleb Williams. And understandably so. I don't know if you've caught on, but almost every time I talk about a team, every time I talk about division, the main point is you're only as good as your quarterback. And you can only go as far as your quarterback takes you. That's one of the biggest issues that we have with this Cleveland Browns. Their quarterback, they've had one of the better teams for the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years, but they just haven't had the consistency at the quarterback position. So nobody really considers them a threat in not just the AFC South or AFC North, but a threat in the NFL, even with arguably the best defensive player in the league in Myles Garrett. When you look at the Chicago team, they had pieces last year. They just didn't have the offensive line. On top of Caleb Williams having that mindset of, I have to make a play every single time. You can't just throw this play away. That does not work. So what they did this entire offseason is focus on the offensive line and focus on the offensive weapons, giving him Colson Loveland. A lot of people were wondering why he didn't go with TJ Warren, but it is, or not, Is it TJ Warren? Yeah. But still, one of the best pass catching tight ends in the draft. Another year with Rome Odunze, another year with DJ Moore, another year with DeAndre Swift. This team has the potential to be explosive. Plus, you have Ben Johnson, who comes from that Detroit team. This team, there's a lot of expectations on this team. In fact, I will say, part because of last year, but there's more expectation this year than last year. One, because the team is better, and two, because the things that you probably expected to happen the first year did not happen the second year. Or the things that I said that all wrong. The thing that you expected to happen in the first year didn't. There were people saying that Caleb Williams was going to lead this team to the playoffs and to the NFC Championship. Well, that was furthest from the truth. Now, I'm not all blaming it on Caleb Williams. I'm not all blaming it on the coaching staff that was there last year. But what I'm saying is this is a new year. And this is yet another opportunity to show. Because, again, if you look, this is one of the better teams, especially defensively, in the league. And one thing that you did not expect that we saw last year is the offense couldn't catch up with the defense. And you would think that it would be reversed with an offense as potent or with the names that they had. But this is a new year. And with this being a new year, you need to see something different. Which is why I say that the first 2 years of a career is the most important. Because there's a lot of things that Caleb Williams has to unlearn. There's a lot of, and this is a good team. But if you don't unlearn these things, it doesn't matter who's around you. It's not going to work. And that also goes for the coaching staff. They believe Ben Johnson's the guy to do it. And I'm also talking like this because a lot of the reports that we heard have been up and down this offseason for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears, as far as he hasn't had the greatest, or let me say, he hasn't had the most consistent training camp. That could be because they're throwing a lot at him because they want to see what he can handle. But there gets to a point where you have to pedal to the metal. You know what I mean? And the reason why I said that the NFC North can arguably be the best division in football is because if you look at every single team, and we'll talk about every single team, obviously, but if you look at every single team, you can make a case for that team being the best team in the division. And if everything works out the way that it should, if Caleb Williams looks all of the number one overall pick that he was a year ago, if he's able to get to the weapons that they have for him, I would not be shocked if the Chicago Bears team with Ben Johnson leads the division. They have the pieces to do it. It's just, are they going to be able to connect them? Are they going to be able to do what they're supposed to do? And I think we have to wonder what happens if that does not happen. which is why I said these next two or the first 2 years are the most important. What happens if this year looks a lot similar to last year? I'm not saying that you can't change, but at some point you start to get set in your ways if you're Caleb Williams. Year 3, you're essentially a vet in the league. When you talk about statistics and how long people's careers are, you're essentially a vet. And to come out of college with the Heisman and just the incredible, illustrious career that you had, to essentially not get anything, and a very, very different viewpoint. There are similarities to the way that we talk about Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud when we talk about Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. We're going to talk about Jaden Daniels next episode, but obviously there's a much wider gap when we talk about, at least right now, when we talk about Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. But Jaden Daniels had one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen, making all the way to the NFC Championship. First rookie quarterback to ever do that. Caleb Williams struggled mightily. What happens if that happens again? Not saying Jaden Daniels makes it to the NFC Championship, but what happens if Caleb Williams struggles? What happens if this coaching staff just isn't the one for him again? That's yet another year of your career. I'm not going to say wasted, but no growth, no development. I don't think that's going to happen because what Ben Johnson did in Detroit was really good. And, I think that was a good pickup. But we'll see. But again, I think that, and I'll probably say this 3 more times, but I think that the Chicago Bears, when you look at the roster, when you look at the team, when you look at the coaching staff, I think they have a chance to be one of, if not the best teams in the NFC North. But like the common theme that we've heard, and like the common theme in the NFL, a lot of it rests on the shoulders of the quarterback. And we'll see if they have one of the best ones. Speaking of that, let's move on. And I don't think there's a bigger question mark, you can say, about a team in the NFC North than the one that is surrounding the Minnesota Vikings, and more specifically, JJ McCarthy. Stop me if you heard this, but the Minnesota Vikings overall have one of the best teams in football. In fact, I'm gonna probably say it again, but almost every team in the NFC North has one of the best rosters in football. But this team is riddled with talent. Byron Murphy. They got Jonathan Allen from Washington. Jerron Hargrave. Like Van Ginkel. Like this boy. And then when you have all these pieces, and then you have Brian Flores as your defensive coordinator, it's no surprise that this defense, the Minnesota Vikings defense, is one of the best defenses in football all year, if not the best. They have the perfect squad with the perfect defensive coordinator. But obviously that's not the question. The question is, and the Minnesota Vikings are actually a perfect example for this. If you don't have, I say this a lot, and it's true, football is the ultimate team sport. You can have a juggernaut at the offense, or your offense can be a juggernaut, but your defense sucks and you're not doing nothing. Your defense can be a juggernaut, but your offense isn't that good. You're tied one hand behind your back. Last year, while the offense wasn't good, the team wasn't balanced. The the yes, they were. Sam Darnold had a great season. Actually, you know what? That's not true. The team was very balanced, and the Minnesota Vikings were one of the best teams in football until you got to the playoffs. Until you got to, the last few games of the season, where the lights were a little brighter and Sam Darnold kind of fell apart. But overall, the Vikings, they were a complete team, and that's why they were one of the best teams in football. Well, Sam Darnold's gone. And the person that they kind of wanted to be Sam Darnold last year but couldn't due to injury is back, and that is JJ McCarthy. There is a lot of pressure on JJ McCarthy. I know JJ is 22 years old, but I want to emphasize, and I think I have to emphasize, that Super Bowl windows do not stay open for long, and they don't stay open forever. Now, some stay open longer than others, depending on who you have at your team or who your quarterback is. Like Patrick Mahomes' Super Bowl window is extremely open. Lamar Jackson, Josh, stuff like that. I've been looking at dynasties and teams that could have been dynasties. And I look at all the components that they have. And I also notice that some of the same things that prevented them from being that team, that prevented them from being that dynasty, is prevalent in almost every team. This team, the Vikings were one of the best teams last year. They had the defense, they had the offense, they just couldn't capitalize in the big moments. JJ McCarthy was, Kevin O'Connell, who's the head coach. That's his guy. He wanted JJ McCarthy, and kind of like Caleb Williams, all you've heard about this training camp is up and down from JJ. Like he's had some high highs and he has some low lows. Now, obviously, he's coming back from I think an ACL injury, like an ACL tear or meniscus tear, one of those two. But he's supposed to be fully healthy going into the season. And this team has pieces, man. Offensively, of course, when you you have arguably the best wide receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson. You have Jordan Addison, even though I don't know if he's going to be suspended a couple of games. You have Aaron Jones at the running back position. This team, you have T.J. Hawkinson. Like, this is a good team. But it does get to a point where it's like, how many times can you say that this is a good team and they don't amount to nothing? That's kind of the issue that the Saints had for a minute. The Saints and Drew Brees had a really good team. There was a good stretch where the Saints and Drew Brees were always amongst the top 3 in preseason predictions as Super Bowl winners. They were like top 2 or 3 odds-on favorite for a minute when we talk about Super Bowl odds because they had Drew Brees, they had an explosive offense, but only once did they make the Super Bowl. That's one, and only two, or in there was so many opportunities that they just didn't capitalize on. When you had a team as good as this team last year, Sam Darnold had a resurging year. There's a lot of expectation that you're going to run it back and essentially be better because you have a younger quarterback and a quarterback that everyone has touted, at least in the organization, is the guy. And there's not much excuse. The offensive line is really good. You have arguably the best wide receiver in the game in Jettas. And you have arguably the best defense with the best defensive coordinator in the league. Like, I was bouncing this off. I was bouncing ideas off the wall. And one idea that I was bouncing off is how far can JJ McCarthy take this team? And then I was thinking back, and I was thinking, what is like the best case scenario? And almost every time I looked at this team, I looked at the pieces, I looked at the strengths, I looked at the weaknesses. This team could be a Super Bowl team. This team is one of the most complete teams in football. When you just look at roster, obviously things are played on paper. Games aren't played on paper, and injuries can happen, whatever. So we don't wish injury upon anyone. But this can be one of the most complete teams, and this is one of the most complete teams in football. And that is one of the reasons why I think that. I'm not saying that JJ McCarthy has to win a Super Bowl. I'm not saying that your first year as a full-time starter, you have to go out and just win it all, right? But when you have the people that we mentioned earlier, when you have Harrison Smith, when you have Christian Darsaw, when you have Justin Jefferson, who, might I add, has never really had outside of last year, has never really had a consistent person passing him the ball. Like, think about it. The man had Kirk Cousins, but he got hurt. Sam Darnold. What's homie's name? Dobbs. Mullins. And now JJ McCarthy. There's a lot on JJ McCarthy's shoulders because we saw what success sort of looks like for this team. We saw how good Sam Darnold was last year. Even though he fizzled out in big moments and in the playoffs, but we saw how good Sam Darnold was. And I'm not saying that you have to have the same amount of success. I'm not saying that when we look up, the Minnesota Vikings have to be the best team in the league. But you have to justify. There has to be some type of justification that the team was okay letting Sam Darnold, who had the best season of his career, and the Vikings were a legit team. You have to justify allowing that player to walk out the door for JJ McCarthy. Because also, if you look at the quarterback room, it's Max Brausner, who did have a pretty good preseason, I will say that, and Carson Wentz. So it's pretty much JJ McCarthy. But it also does go back to what I said in the beginning about Caleb Williams. your first 2 years are the most important years. And obviously, Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy's first 2 years went extremely different, but ultimately ended the same disappointment. And I'm not saying disappointment because, the team didn't win a Super Bowl or whatever, but when we talk about Caleb Williams' disappointment, it didn't reach the heights that you thought it should reach, that he probably would want it to reach. And when you talk about JJ McCarthy, I mean, he got hurt. This is year 2. This is the year. And that could have been a blessing in disguise and said JJ McCarthy sitting and just watching the speed of the game, watching, soaking in everything, and hopefully it just, turns out to be one of them. At least that's what the Vikings are hoping. But this is year 2 for JJ McCarthy, and honestly, the first year as a starting quarterback. So maybe the expectation shouldn't be as high. But it is. And a lot of the expectation, honestly, has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with what we've seen this team can be with a different quarterback. Kind of like I was talking about with the Seahawks and Sam Darnold. There's a lot of expectation on the Seahawks team because it is a great roster, and with a quarterback that some would say is lesser than the quarterback that they have now, they saw more success. Or they saw high success. So you know what I'm saying? Same thing here. Obviously, the organization felt it was okay to let Sam Darnold walk because they had JJ McCarthy. It's time to justify that. And with a roster this good, this deep, this experienced, with a roster that can rival a lot of people with some of the best players in the league, Justin Jefferson on this team, and you have Ryan Kelly, yeah. Byron Murphy, yeah, bro. It's time. And we'll see. So last year was an interesting year for the NFC North. More specifically, I want to focus on the Detroit Lions and how I think last year couldn't have gone any better and worse for the Lions. The Lions went into the season as Super Bowl contenders. Throughout majority of the season, the Lions showed you and reminded you why they were preseason Super Bowl contenders. They boasted one of the best teams in football, more specifically the offense. You saw the best of Jared Goff. You saw Amon-Ra St. Brown. You saw Jahmyr Gibbs and, David Montgomery, Jameson Williams. This team is just bursting out the seams with offensive talent, not to mention Sam Laporta, who is arguably one of the best tight ends in the league. This team is a deep team. Tim Patrick came on last year and had a huge impact. There wasn't much. Like I said, there was a good point of the season where it was looking like a foregone conclusion that this Detroit Lions team was going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. But it goes back to the age-old saying, football is the ultimate team sport. As great as their offense was, it seemed like every single week their defense just started dropping. Like, it seemed like almost there were so many important people that just started dropping. Started with Aiden Hutchinson, their best defender. And it just seemed like from there, every week it was a impactful defensive player, might I add, that went down. To the point where you get to the playoffs and you get to play Washington. And because your defense is decimated by injury, it leaves your margin of error extremely slim because it's at this point not balanced. Your defense can't pick up your offense and vice versa. And Jared Goff proceeded to, or the Lions offense, I'll say, proceeded to have one of the worst games of the season. I think they had like 4 turnovers. And Washington won. So you go from a Super Bowl contender to losing in the, first round? Second round? And that's how I say, and that's why this is also, and I'm not saying that the Super Bowl window was closed. On the contrary, I think that this team can reload and is going to reload. Aiden Hutchinson's back. You know, you got Muhammad. You got Panay Sewell on the offensive side of the ball. Like, you got Alex. I know I'm going to say your last name wrong. Arzonlo, but he was pretty good last year. Jack Campbell, like, we got pieces. Zach Cunningham. But in that, you lose your top 2 coordinators. You lose your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator. The offense that was creative, that was explosive, that was a big play machine, that offensive coordinator is gone. The defense that, when healthy, was one of the best defenses and one of the most exotic defenses in the league, that coordinator is gone. Ben Johnson's out of here for the offense, and I forgot the homie's name. He's the coach for the Jets now. It's slipping my mind, but he's gone, the defensive coordinator. And I don't know. I could be wrong. If you do know, leave it in the comments. Let me know. But I don't know the team, no matter how good it was. I don't know the team that loses both their top 2 coordinators and wins the Super Bowl the next year. I don't know who has done that. I get maybe losing one, but losing both? And don't get me wrong, I don't think Dan Campbell is a bad coach. I think Dan Campbell is an incredible coach. I think Dan Campbell is the right guy for the Detroit Lions, which is also funny because remember when he first got there and how bad his opening press conference was, talking about biting kneecaps, and how bad his first year was. I think they won like maybe 1 or 2 games, maybe 3. So to go from that to being in the NFC Championship last year, or no, they lost in the second round because they lost to but still being Super Bowl contenders. And I think I have to do a see to believe approach because again, the last year I'm gonna say was an anomaly year because you don't see that many key players get hurt. that rapidly. They they started dropping like flies like crazy. Key players. And you can chalk, even though they did have a bad game and the offense wasn't good against Washington in the playoffs, but you can say if the defense was healthy, it could maybe been different. I don't know if you can say that, or you lost both your offense and defensive coordinators. I think just by default, you're going to take a step back. Now, how far of a step back is that? I don't know. Because we've seen there for the longest there's been a question mark about how good Jared Goff can be dating back to when he was on the Rams, but he's shown these past few years that Jared Goff is a top tier quarterback. Well, top tier is crazy. Is a top 10 quarterback in the league. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a top 5 wide receiver in the league. Jahmyr Gibbs is a top 5 running back in the league. This, at least last year, when healthy, was a top 10 defense in the league. Maybe even top 5, the way they were swarming around the ball. But, again, I think this team can be very successful. I really do. But, again, if they do, if they do have a better season than last year, the odds is stacked against them because, again, they lost 2 of the most important pieces to their team, and that is their offense and defensive coordinator. And it's not like, you know what it is? It's kind of like if the Chiefs lost Spagnuolo. That's a huge loss. And we're about to see what the Eagles look like because they lost Kellen Moore, and we'll talk about the Eagles next episode. So I think, especially this offense, I think that this team can make it to a Super Bowl. But I'm also going off the lens of, okay, so they're definitely going to get healthier. Then they have to be healthier than that was historic. They started losing people in historic fashions last year on the defense. And it felt like every single injury was on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't foresee that happening again. But in the same, and on top of that, they have one of the best offenses in football. They have Jared Goff, Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams. They have Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, who is probably one of, if not the fastest running back in the league. Sam Laporta. They have an offensive squad. But I don't expect that creativity. That some of the plays where it's like, how the hell did you draw that up? I think that right now is Ben Johnson, who is in Chicago. So we'll see. But they have a shot. This again, I don't foresee the whole freaking team getting hurt again, So we'll see. On top of that, they have kind of like the revenge aspect as far as, they want to show that last year they could have been hoisting the NFL Super Bowl or the Lombardi Trophy if it wasn't for injury. So I think that's going to be a motivating factor going into the season. So we'll see. But again, I am interested to see what this team looks like with 2 new coordinators. So, when last episode, I talked about the last episode I broke down the NFC West, and one of the teams that I talked about that had the most question marks especially at the quarterback position, was the Arizona Cardinals. Not saying I feel the exact same way, but the last team I want to talk about in this division is obviously the team I haven't got to yet, and that is the Green Bay Packers. Let me first start this by saying we know how good Jordan Love is. We know I was initially wrong. I will come out here and say I was initially wrong about Jordan Love. I initially said that it was going to be a very rough transition from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. I just didn't think Jordan Love got enough reps. I thought Jordan Love tried a little too hard to emulate what Aaron Rodgers gave Green Bay, and he just didn't have the talent for that. I just didn't think Jordan Love was going to work as a starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. I knew he had talent. I just didn't think it was all going to come together. I was extremely wrong. It's come together for Jordan Love, and he is an exceptional quarterback. And I feel that a lot of times we talk about this Green Bay Packers team, and a lot of times when we talk about Jordan Love, the game that we focus on is obviously their just dismantling of the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs 2 years ago. Stop me if you heard this before. But the Green Bay Packers have one of the best rosters in football. Like yeah. They have arguably the best safety in the league in Xavier McKinney. They have one of the best running backs in the league in Josh Jacobs. And when healthy, because that was another issue for them. When healthy, they could arguably have one of the best wide receiver rooms in all of football. When we talk about Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden, the rookie from Texas, Romeo Dobbs. Yeah, they have their offense, their room, McCole Harmon. Actually, I think McCole Harmon might have got released. I'm not too sure, but even so, Romeo Dobbs, Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. The issue with them, especially last year, is it's not funny, but sort of the same way we talk about the Lions and how their entire offense or defense pretty much got hurt. Almost every offensive wide receiver got hurt for the Green Bay Packers. The man was throwing to me by the end of the season. Man, they just couldn't catch a break. Almost every single premier wide receiver that they had got hurt. So, you can say if they were healthy, you never know. But I wanna focus on Jordan Love for a second. Because you hear a lot of praise, and rightfully so, when they talk about Jordan Love. You know, one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league. He has a cannon of an arm. He can be mobile when he needs to be, even though that was a issue. They wanted him to be a little bit more mobile. He's one of the talent-wise, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So when you hear people talk, and I'm not trying to be a hater because this is going to sound like hate, and it's not. When you see and hear people talk about Jordan Love, that's mainly, they usually talk about the positives, which is fine. But there are two sides to that coin. And I think much better. He's much better. Let me say that. Much, much better. But there are some issues that he has in his game that you would think has gotten ironed out. And when I say much better, there's some issue. You know how we talked about Anthony Richardson and how he still struggles with basic things? While Jordan Love doesn't struggle with basic things, there are things that he's struggled with since his first year as a full-time starter that he struggled with last year. Holding on to the ball too long, your field vision. Sometimes you'll see a throw from Jordan Love that is like one of the most beautiful throws, one of the most beautiful spirals that you've seen go to the other team, and you're thinking to yourself, there wasn't another wide receiver within 5 yards of the person that caught that ball. So who was he throwing it to? Sometimes, like I said, he tries to sit in the pocket a little too long instead of using his mobility, and he'll get sacked. I'm not saying that these are groundbreaking or these are issues that would make you not think highly of this team, but they're issues that he's had for a minute now. These are issues that has plagued him for a good minute. And these are also issues that reared his ugly head against better teams. And don't get me wrong, I think a lot of people, including myself, were also wrong about Matt LaFleur. When you coach a Hall of Fame talent like Aaron Rodgers, it's very easy to think you don't have to do much because it's Aaron Rodgers. You know, it's like that was always one of the biggest talking points when we talk about detractors in talking about someone like Phil Jackson. And I'm not saying Matt LaFleur is on the same level as Phil Jackson. Please don't hear me say that. But they were like, how good is Phil Jackson really when you go from Michael Jordan in the Bulls dynasty to Kobe Bryant, Shaq, and the Lakers? And then their argument got even louder when you see what happened later on in his career, when he was coaching the Knicks. So when people talk about Matt LaFleur, it's like, is Matt LaFleur really a good coach, or did he just have Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers makes anyone look good? Well, with Jordan Love, he's shown that he is a good coach. He's a really good coach. But you would hope that some of those deficiencies that Jordan Love has and that he's had for a minute would have been ironed out by now. As I've gone throughout this episode, and I've talked ad nauseum about the NFC North, I think that I am almost ready to get off my take that the AFC North is the best division in football. Because I think the AFC North is carried heavily by the top two teams, Ravens and Bengals, or moreover, the top two players, Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. But I look at this NFC North division, and I look at a team like the Green Bay Packers, where you can say they could have, just like the Detroit Lions, you can say they could have had a huge part in who was in the Super Bowl last year And a lot of people picked the Green Bay Packers last year to make the Super Bowl, but their entire wide receiver room went down. And it kind of goes back to the Brock Purdy and what do you do with less argument. The thing is, though, Jordan Love was slicing and dicing, but it's just he didn't have really consistent receivers to throw to because they got hurt. This is a big year for the Green Bay Packers because I think that this is, year 6 or 7 for Jordan Love. I don't know if they have. I think every team in the NFC North has a superpower that another team doesn't. I think that the Chicago Bears, when you look at it, they have, just by name, they have arguably the best offense in the division. When you look at the Vikings, they have the best defense in the division. They also have the best player in the division when we talk about Justin Jefferson. When you talk about the Lions, we're going off the premise that they have the best skills group in the division. When you can debate who has a better offense between the Bears and the Detroit Lions, but you can also say what we've seen throughout the years, the Detroit Lions has the best quarterback in Jared Goff in the division. And with this Green Bay Packers, when they're fully healthy, they have the best wide receiver room in this division. They don't have the best wide receiver, but the collection of wide receiver talent, there's not a team in this division that has more talent at the wide receiver position. But with all that, every single team has something that they need to either prove, has a fatal flaw that they need to get over, or needs some type of validity. And with this Green Bay Packers team, there's a reason why almost year after year after year, people pick the Green Bay Packers to be one of those teams to represent that could represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. Health plays a huge part in football. We know this. But I can't say. I think when everyone plays at their best, when everyone's healthy, the margins are razor thin when we talk about the differences between these teams in the division. And I wouldn't be shocked if healthy, the Green Bay Packers is that team to reign supreme. I don't know if I'll go as far as saying that, but still. This is a very competitive division, and the Green Bay Packers is a very good team. When healthy, one of the best teams in football. But if I'm ranking this division, if I'm ranking the teams, I'm going to have to go with the Detroit Lions number 1 because the coordinators are not there, but they still have, they have the most recent success. So I'm going to say the Detroit Lions, then the Green Bay Packers. You see, a lot is riding on Caleb Williams. A lot is riding on Caleb Williams. And just his growth and development. Because, to be completely honest with you, if Caleb Williams looks all of the player that they thought he was going to be, they could be the best team in the division, the Bears. but I'm going to have to see it to believe it. So I have the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers. I trust Caleb Williams. Even after what we saw last year, I trust Caleb Williams more than I trust JJ McCarthy at this point, even though I think overall team right. Yeah, I'm going to – the Vikings that I think was like second in division last year is going to finish last. Yeah. I have Detroit, Green Bay, Chicago, and Minnesota. I could be wrong, but I'm not even confident with that ranking because I see a bunch of scenarios where each team is number one in the division. But again, Detroit, Green Bay, Chicago, Minnesota. I will say this, though. I can see this division having the most playoff teams in football. I can see every single one of these teams making the playoffs. I can see every single one of these teams making the playoffs next year or this year. So we'll see. And we have one more division, and I wanted to save, obviously, the NFC East. Not saying it's the best, but my team resides in the NFC East, so save that for next episode. There you have it. That's been today's episode of the Unpopular Podcast. I truly, truly appreciate you guys. If you want a Popular Podcast shirt, hoodie, sweater, long sleeve joggers, the link in the description below. I have multiple different colors, multiple different designs. Get your Unpopular Podcast merch today. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get as many subscribers as possible. I appreciate all of you guys. If you like the content, like what you're seeing, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to subscribe. I'm trying to grow, and I cannot do it without you guys, so I appreciate it. Also, for the DSPs, that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, please follow, please subscribe. No platform is bigger than the other. I'm trying to grow the podcast unilaterally, and I cannot do it without you guys' help. So if you tune in to hear my luscious voice on DSPs, please subscribe, please follow, please rate, please share, please comment, all of that. It means a lot. My socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, please follow, please subscribe. That's probably the quickest way to get to me. I don't mind you commenting, just keep it respectful, and I don't mind going back and forth. It just means that A, you're listening to me, and B, you have an opinion that either I agree or you agree with me or disagree. Either way, I would love to hear it. Again, if you keep it respectful, I do not mind going back and forth. I don't mind hearing what you have to say. Just please follow, please subscribe. Again, I post content pretty much daily there. So, yeah. Until next time, much love.